and they just happened to carry Star Wars figures. For I don't know why, but they did, and they even had Star Wars figures in the shopping mall there in Phnom Penh. There was a store that seemed to specialize in them. It was the craziest thing of all the things to have, in a shopping mall in Cambodia. They had Star Wars figures. But so as my interest peaked in the show, I started going and I would buy the Star Wars figures one by one by one until I bought the store out. And they, at the time, I think probably these were considered older figures in the U.S. at the time, but they had the Clone Wars figures on the blue cards, which are really great. They're super articulated as the vintage collection, and they had some of the vintage collection figures there too. And I just bought them all one by one. So, eventually I cleaned the store out over just a few weeks. And they were more expensive than they are here in the U.S. But so, they're in Cambodia and Phnom Penh at my apartment. I had all the Clone Wars figures displayed on my desk on stands. And, after watching these last 4 episodes, I've got them all set out again, about 50 of them. So yeah, it got me back into collecting as well, which is good and bad.
I love it. That's awesome. That is awesome. David, how did it impact you personally in your views of the
How
saga?
do I follow that? How do you, not only for Adam, does he, change career, not as a writer, but, going from, travel journals and stuff like that to a completely different subject matter, but also re-sparked his collecting. I'm going to try here. Just people be patient with me here. I was thinking about this, and, just tonight, again, before getting on with both of you, I was going back through the episode guides, and as you guys know, there is a video they release every week with these 12 episodes called Clone Wars Download. And in the last one, Dave Filoni was talking about how he hopes that he did justice to the Clone Wars, to all the fans, and he even said, to kids that grew up on it. And like I'd mentioned a few minutes ago, it was really the Star Wars that my son started with. I started in 1977 with the original trilogy. I've seen a number of people who started with the prequels, and then a lot started with the Clone Wars, and of course now we've got more with Rebels and so forth. But I think about how the Clone Wars was a 3-year period of time, but we literally have been exploring this from 2008, Aaron, like you said, all the way till now, till 2020, with stops and so on. But I think something that initially made it difficult was that with not just my son, but then my daughter being born, it was hard to sit down and watch these, episodes on Clone Wars each, Friday night, I think, when it was on Cartoon Network. But they weren't in the chronological order. So like when Adam was mentioning season 4 and on, what was really nice is they had all the assets together and they could really go forward and not go, forwards and backwards. So I remember watching some episodes, again, being distracted by my son at times, not being able to just sit there and watch them, but then trying to figure out, wait a minute, did that Jedi just die in that episode? Or wait, why is this person back? Or Adagalia is there and not here. And but ultimately, as time passed, I was able to watch all of them. I bought them all on DVD, all on Blu-ray. And I've watched the series several times in chronological order. And when you do that, it does bring about, what both of you said. It just enriches, the prequels. I have a deeper understanding of, Palpatine and Dooku and even Sifo Dyas and how they started what we saw, Ewan McGregor talk about as Obi-Wan in episode 2. And so we see more of that. The Mortis arc, enriching my view of that. Aaron, you and I've talked about that arc on podcasts and stuff like that. Just staggering. I mean, you could talk about that for weeks and months. And then just in 1977, as an 8-year-old kid, hearing Sir Alec Guinness say, I fought in the Clone Wars, I had no clue what that was. I'm not sure George Lucas did. Maybe he did at that time. But to now, this many years later, see all the battles and behind-the-scenes stuff that occurred, it's incredible. We see the Republic and the Jedi implode. And it really is a cautionary tale, and so it was so neat to see that. And then I think you mentioned it, Aaron. Just I get now why Anakin can not sit there, but race to the Jedi Temple and intervene when Mace Windu and the Emperor are battling, and why he ends up, leading to the death of Mace and to so many Jedis. When you see his experiences through, these 7 seasons, it makes a lot more sense than just seeing the 2 movies, Episode 2 and Episode 3. So huge impact on me and my view of the prequels and the saga overall.
Very good, very good. Yeah, obviously it's had a huge impact on a lot of people. And it's fun to hear the stories of how it's changed people's opinions, how the impacts are there. It also had a huge impact not only on people's personal thoughts and feelings, but it had a huge impact on the saga itself and on the mythology of the saga. David, we're going to keep you rolling there. What do you feel was the biggest impact the Clone Wars had on Star Wars itself and its mythology?
Yeah, well, I needed to do some work last night. So last night I got out, and I have it sitting right here, The Power of Myth by Joseph Campbell with Bill Moyers. And, of course, this is from, it's copyright 1988. This was a series of interviews, if people remember, with Bill Moyers back in, I think, 85 and 86, about, maybe 16 to 18 hours of interviews boiled down to, I know I've seen a 4-episode series on Joseph Campbell and the Power of Myth on Netflix. This is the book here in front of me is a lot of those conversations. And I went back and I just had to get in my head some of the mythology again. I love reading about it. And so, one couple of things that I wrote down here after I got my brain juices going again was that the Clone Wars it carried on and expanded the mythology laid out in the movies. The hero's journey. We see Ahsoka on that journey, and in fact, what I've seen a lot of Star Wars fans talking about is how their journeys aren't done, and a lot of people are talking about Rebels and how it continues there. So I definitely see that in those two characters. I think of good versus evil, right? We see that here. Palpatine giving that order. Here's evil incarnate, right? We see, Filoni, he's talked about a number of Star Wars series and characters. He talks about selflessness and selfishness, and he talks about it in the behind-the-scenes stuff for The Mandalorian right now, and he's talked about it a lot whenever he's talked about the Clone Wars. And so that's a huge mythological theme is it going to be selflessness or selfishness? And we definitely see Ahsoka modeling that in these last episodes, the selflessness and being caring and loving, even though people are coming to try to kill her. And the other thing that it really reminded me of, and when I went back into the Power of Myth here, was, as humans, are we going to continue to develop our humanity and show that we have a heart, or do we become the robot like Vader? And you see, went back, like I said last night, and seeing Joseph Campbell talk about Vader and becoming a robot, becoming non-man. Are you going to be that in the system, or are you going to continue to live out your humanity? That's another huge mythological theme that, I see in Ahsoka. I think about it with Rex, too, in the clones. He could have been continued on as a pawn, but fortunately Ahsoka was able to help get that chip out of there. So there's, mythology all over this series. But those are just a few of the things that I was thinking about in terms of the Clone Wars and Star Wars mythology.
Excellent. Adam, how about you? What do you feel is the Clone Wars' biggest contribution to the saga, and how it affected the saga and the mythology of the saga?
Yeah, well, there's a lot of things that were kind of left a blank slate with the prequels that this addresses. It's funny, you mentioned the quote of from Obi-Wan in A New Hope about fighting in the Clone Wars, which kind of sparked all this when George went back and wrote the prequels. But the funny thing is, we get the start of the Clone Wars in Episode 2, and we get the end of the Clone Wars in Episode 3, but we really never get to see what the Clone Wars are. So that's the great thing about this series, is it kind of gives us, it gives us everything in between with a nice bookend on each side. So it fills all that in. It tells us who these clones are, that they're not, simply, fleshy robots. They're not, just mindless warriors. That each clone is different and unique and has their own personality and desires, and that was originally early on that was exemplified by all their unique the unique paint jobs, designs that they do on their helmets and their armor and their tattoos. But with D. Bradley Baker, he'd actually give them each their own personality. There's there's so many other things it fills in. It explains who Sifo Dyas was and what all that was about him in that we just get mentioned in passing in Episode 2. How and why the clone army was created. Something really basic that was just never explained in the movies. And the concept of life after death for the Jedi, what that is, how it's attained, the fact that Sith don't have an afterlife is something that's, kind of, I don't know if it's how directly it's addressed, but it's certainly, if not, it's indirectly addressed to the Clone Wars. There's so much that's brought out, and the fact, the way that the Jedi have lost their way, kind of how they got to that point, and that the Jedi are actually at fault, for their own demise, that they lose their way by becoming warriors rather than protectors, that they kind of they lose some of their heart in all this. They don't allow members of their orders to have love and attachment and families and really important important basic needs. And so George kind of explores, and Dave Filoni explores, how that kind of loss of heart, that loss of sympathy and empathy and love leads them to be kind of these cold warriors that are blind to the very thing that's kind of destroyed